Well, happy Thanksgiving, everyone. Good to see you here today, and trust that your weekend is going well for you, and we'll get you home or back to whatever festivities you have left for the remainder of the day and tomorrow in just a little bit here. Let me start by asking you a question, and you don't have to answer if you don't want to, but it's a fairly easy question. Have you ever been a victim of identity theft? Anybody here ever been a victim of identity theft? No? Well, that's good. That's good. I've not been a victim of it myself personally, but kind of in a secondary way because Lynn was several years ago. I guess you would consider it a milder version of identity theft. We got a phone call from a credit card company saying, hey, we just want to verify that your application for this credit card is going to be able to go ahead as applied. And Lynn's like, I did not apply for a credit card. Actually, what's up with that? Turns out someone had acquired all her contact information, which that part isn't so hard, actually had her social insurance number, and was then applying for a credit card under her identity. And so thankfully, they were able to nip it in the bud at that point. It didn't go any further than that. However, for the next several years, she had to go through a lot of a process and jump through a lot of hoops to actually get credit at places because she now has that on her record. They are taking extra precautions. So it impacted her for several years after that in that sort of way. So it felt really bad and all the different emotions that come up as a result of that, feeling and knowing that someone out there has actually taken your identity and they're trying to live, in a sense, your life as you, is really a sketchy and scary type of a scenario. So hopefully it never happens to you, and thankfully it didn't go any further than that for us. So let me ask you another question, not related to credit card scores or credit card applications or anything like that, but does it ever feel, or have you ever felt like part of your identity has been lost or stolen in the shuffle of life? Ever felt like someone is kind of living your life, or circumstances or things that you have gone through have somehow rewritten your life for you? And you wish you can kind of go back either to that particular time and place or that particular incident, whatever it was, and kind of regain your identity. Pick it back up and get it back again. Or maybe it wasn't a specific event necessarily, but maybe it was a gradual thing that you look back and you go, you know what? I'm not the person I thought I was going to be or started out becoming today. And you kind of feel like your identity has kind of gotten lost a little bit along the way. And maybe we can all kind of relate to that to some degree or another. The underlying premise of this series is that our emotional health and our spiritual maturity are inseparable. They go hand in hand. They're kind of two sides of the same coin. So in part one last week, we looked beneath the surface of our lives at the 90% of our iceberg, which is the bulk of who we are, and we identified the 10 symptoms of emotionally unhealthy spirituality from Peter Scazzaro. And then we took those 10 symptoms, turned them into just 3 categories to kind of simplify it down a little bit. And the 3 categories were doing, denying, and dividing. And so hopefully you've had a chance to kind of look through that or maybe walk through that a little bit in your small group during the week. So just to recap very quickly, the doing, denying, and dividing. We said that doing for God instead of dwelling with God for our emotional and spiritual health. Denying is denying instead of dealing with your emotional and spiritual health. And dividing is dividing life into manageable parts, where you kind of keep things a little bit at arm's length. Instead of displaying signs of weakness, spiritual or emotional, you kind of keep life in kind of categories and kind of separate it out a little bit. So that's the doing, denying, and dividing. If you've identified yourself according to any one of those 3 categories, or according to any of the 10 symptoms, and hopefully you have, because ultimately they hit us somewhere. All of us can kind of see ourselves in one of those or in more of those types of symptoms, for sure. So if you've identified yourself in any of those, then chances are, to some degree, your identity has been linked to that overall symptom in your life. And you've begun to live out of a false sense of who you are. Because if you identify yourself in the doing, denying, or dividing category, whatever symptoms might be in your life of those categories, you begin to live out of that. And so your identity gets a little bit lost in the shuffle. The real you, the true you, gets kind of covered up and lost in those other types of things. Here's an illustration to kind of make the point. I know a family whose mother and the wife of the family has a lot of anger and control issues. And it's because of her own past and things that she's been through. And so there's a reason why she is the way that she is. But she's so much that way that the whole rest of her family is now kind of wrapped up in her emotional baggage. And so they become consumed by her life, her emotions, her struggles, and that sort of thing. And so the whole family is kind of caught up in this tsunami of emotions. The husband in particular has been lost in the shuffle. He's lost his own personal identity because her stuff is so dominating and so big, and it seems like her emotions are more important. Her emotions are bigger and get highlighted, and so his emotions, his needs kind of get lost a little bit in the shuffle. It's so much that way that he no longer knows what he thinks or feels about a lot of things in life. So if you were to ask this man, what do you think about such and such? He would literally turn to his wife for the answer. Because he's lost his own sense of self and identity. He can't articulate fully what he thinks, what he feels, what his emotions are, what his needs and desires are, and he will defer to her because he's lost himself in her. And sometimes, not necessarily to that degree, we lose ourselves in some of the things that we're looking at in this series, some of the emotional issues and things of the past or things of the present. We lose our identity. So today, in this message, we're going to go a little deeper into that particular topic and look at what it means to find and live out of your true identity. To find and live out of your true identity. On one occasion with his disciples, Jesus wanted to know who the people said that he was. And he wanted to know who they, the disciples, said that he was. And it wasn't because his identity was based on the opinions of others. He genuinely wanted to know, what do you think about me? Who do you say that I am? And so Peter got the answer right. Peter says, you are the Christ, the Messiah, or the anointed one of God. And so Jesus then goes on to say how he's going to suffer. Jesus himself is going to suffer. He's going to be rejected. He's going to die, and he's going to be raised to life. And now he's got his disciples' attention. I mean, he just painted quite the picture for them, and he's really got their attention. And so he goes on to say in Luke chapter 9, whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross daily and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me will save it. Now, at that point, I'm thinking the disciples are probably a little bit like a deer in the headlights kind of thing. Or back then it might have been an antelope in the torchlight. I'm not sure what the real picture is. But they kind of have this, I'm guessing and thinking, they had this stunned look on their face. Jesus is talking about taking up your cross and following him. Now, this was before Jesus was crucified, and it was before how we kind of look at the cross metaphorically and symbolically today, even though we know it was a literal thing for Jesus. So that was before that. When they thought about the cross, they were thinking Roman crucifixion in all its gore, in all its pain and suffering. What a horrible, terrible, painful, and public way to die. So when Jesus says, take up your cross and follow me, that's the image that they had in their minds. And they're thinking, what? You want me to take up my cross daily and follow you? Like it was a big deal, the way that they would have kind of heard what Jesus was saying. And then Jesus is talking about this idea, if you want to gain your life, you got to lose it. If you lose it, you gain it. Like, what is he talking about? Thankfully, Jesus kind of elaborates and kind of brings a little clearer picture in the last part where he says this, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world and yet lose or forfeit their very self? Or perhaps you've heard it said this way, what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and lose their soul? Right? Kind of familiar with that verse. Now, when we read that verse, we usually think of what it means for our eternal soul, that you either gain or lose your soul eternally, and it certainly means that. But it also is referring to our soul today, right now, presently. This life that we are living, we can either lose or gain our soul. Your soul is the core of who you are. Your soul is the essence of you. It's your mind, your will, and your emotions. That's who you are. That's your soul. And so Jesus was talking about this idea of being able to lose your soul, losing your true self, your identity, the essence of who you are. And when we're not healthy emotionally, when we're living out of some of those symptoms and those categories that we talked about earlier, we begin to lose our soul. We begin to lose our true self in the making and in the mix of what's going on in and around us. So, speaking specifically to those who are following Jesus, our identity is found in Christ. Right? That's where our true identity lies. It's found in Christ. So, when we commit our lives to Christ, we are reborn. We're born of the Spirit, the Bible talks about. And at that moment, our soul starts this process of being reshaped into the image of Christ. And so if you're a follower of Jesus, you've given your life to Jesus, you've been reborn, and now your soul is being reshaped into the image of Christ. And that's your true identity as a follower of Christ. But whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, there are many ways in this life that we could potentially lose our souls, lose our true identity. We believe that we're all made in God's image. We're all made to have a relationship with Him through Christ. And there are so many different ways that we could lose our identity by drifting away from what we were created to be. I mentioned last week how one of the core issues in my life growing up that I've had to deal with was the idea of denying my emotions. And so just based on kind of my family upbringing and my own personality and just the way that I interpreted things and the way I responded to things, the unspoken message in my home growing up was that emotions are bad. Emotions are dangerous. Remember I gave the illustration last week of the fireworks that we went to and how emotions are unpredictable like fireworks. They can be fun and exciting 1 second, but like the fireworks I was at last week, they could explode in your face the next. And so your emotions, for me, are that unpredictable and that dangerous. And so what did I do? I denied my emotions. I tried to pretend they weren't there. I tried to stuff them down and kind of maneuver through life denying that my emotions were either important or relevant or real. But the problem with that is I was denying a core part of my identity. Because my emotions are an expression of who I am. My mind, my will, and my emotions, all those things are part of that. That's me. And by denying my emotions, I was denying a core part of my very self. Now, if you've been raised in the church, you've been taught about dying to self and taking up your cross like we just read. But often what happens is, like one of the symptoms, we die to the wrong thing. And we become these martyrs in the wrong sense of the word. And we die to the things that we don't necessarily have to die to. Some people die to the pleasures of this world because it sounds spiritual to die to the things of the flesh. And there's a measure of that that's good and necessary. But God created us with certain desires. And so there are certain pleasures and joys and experiences that, done in God's designed way, are good and healthy. So sometimes we die to the wrong things. And we begin to live out of a false sense of self. And that's I started doing that, stuffing my emotions down. Maybe you have your story, things that you've done or the way that you've handled life one way or the other, where you start living out of this false identity and living out of some of the symptoms. So whether you deny your emotions or you wear them on your sleeve, our emotional and spiritual health is inseparably linked to what we feel and how we express or suppress those feelings. Now, this is so crucial to this message today and kind of linking last week with this week. So important for us to kind of grasp that, understand that, and kind of work with that. Let me read it again. our emotional and spiritual health is inseparably linked to what we feel and how we express or suppress those feelings. So important to catch that. Let me kind of expand on it a little bit further. When it comes to finding our true self, Peter Scazzaro, which is where much of this material is coming from, he says this. He says, the journey of genuine transformation to emotionally healthy spirituality begins with a commitment to allow yourself to feel. Do you give yourself permission to feel what you're feeling? Or to think about life the way you're thinking about it? Do you give yourself permission to do that? And this idea of giving yourself permission and this commitment to do that, the commitment to feel means giving yourself that permission in an intentional and contemplative sort of way. So you're doing that. You're giving yourself permission to feel certain things, but in a very intentional, very thoughtful, contemplative sort of way. I think that we all probably hide our truest emotions from most people. I think we all do that with the deepest part of who we are. But there are two extremes when it comes to how we handle our emotions. So here's what I want you to do. I want to give you the two extremes. I want you to yourself, identify which one you tend to lean towards more often than not, okay? Which one is kind of your default extreme? The first one is this. When we are very guarded with our thoughts and our feelings and not really giving ourselves permission to fully feel. And the temptation here is that we suppress without contemplative feeling, okay? Do you do that? Do you suppress your feelings without really thinking about why you're feeling that way or what it is you're really feeling and kind of just looking at it a little bit deeper? So you suppress without contemplative feeling. There's this movie, an old movie. I don't even know how old it is, very old because I was quite young when I saw it. It's a comedy, and if it's inappropriate, I apologize right now because I was young. I don't remember what the comedy is. But there's this one character who throughout the whole movie was always getting hurt. And he had this funny way of saying things. And every time he got hurt, he would say, "Ooh, that didn't hurt." And that was throughout the whole movie. That's what he was doing. And so at one point, he falls down this huge flight of stairs, thump, 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 all the way to the bottom. He's laying on the floor, and he says, "Well, that didn't hurt." And then someone comes and they walk across his hand, and he's like, "Ooh, that hurt." And that's the way it is with those who suppress their emotions. They go through life going, "That didn't hurt. That didn't hurt. Oh, that's not a big deal. Oh, don't worry about it. No big deal. No, you didn't offend me there." They suppress. But eventually, some small thing happens where they go, "That hurt." And suddenly that one small thing becomes everything. Because they've suppressed their emotions so much and tried to deny it so much that suddenly it's like one thing becomes everything and really, really causes all kinds of damage and harm. And if you're the one kind of back and maybe said or did whatever, you're wondering, what did I do? What did I say? Like, why is that such a big deal? Well, it's probably because it's not just that one thing. It's so many things have been suppressed. That didn't hurt. That one thing suddenly became just too much. And so that's some of the danger of that extreme when you're very guarded and you don't give yourself permission to fully think. The second extreme is this. So again, which one do you fall into? Instead of being very guarded with your thoughts and feelings, you are very unguarded with your thoughts and feelings. And this one, again, you're not really giving yourself permission to feel, and the temptation is to express without contemplative feeling. Whereas one you suppress without really thinking about what it is you're feeling, this one you express without really thinking about what it is you're feeling. And so in that extreme, a person feels things and they just blurt it out. It just comes out. Everybody sees it and hears it and experiences it. And that person often comes across as being a little more open and honest, which they are if they have thought about what it is they're feeling. But the temptation in that extreme is that they haven't thought about what they're feeling. They just express what they're feeling. And so the importance of contemplative thinking, giving yourself permission to feel in a thoughtful way, Why am I feeling that? Why am I thinking that? What is it that's really going on the inside of me? What is God trying to say in the midst of all of that? What do I need to learn or know or do in response to some of that? So our emotional health and our maturity require living out of our true self, our true identity as God has designed us to be. And so I want to give an illustration that helps show what it means for you to live out of your true self, for you to give yourself permission to feel in a thoughtful way, and for you to give permission to someone else to feel in a thoughtful way. Because we all err either to suppress or to express in unhealthy ways. So I want to give you this illustration. Psychiatrist Murray Bowen introduced this word differentiation. Okay, it's a big word. Here's what he means by differentiation. It refers to a person's ability to define his or her own life's goals and values apart from the pressures of those around them. In other words, a person who has this differentiation knows who they are and who they're not. They are secure in their identity. They're not perfect, but they're secure in who they are, and they live out of their true self. Now, the word differentiation, at least for this newfie, is a word that doesn't just roll off the tongue, okay? It kind of takes me a lot of mental thought to say that word, okay? Differentiation. Don't ask me to spell it. So I came up with a slightly easier word for us to say, and then a kind of an image, a picture of how it applies to what we're talking about here. And the word is a differential. So if you're familiar with cars at all, your car in its drivetrain has a gear called a differential gear. Okay? And here's, in a nutshell, what that means. When you're driving your car and you're going around a left-hand turn, the outside wheel, or the passenger side wheel, has to travel faster and further than the inside wheel because it's on the outside going around the corner. Without a differential gear, when you make the turn, that outside wheel is forced to drag, or it skips along because it's not able to go at its own speed. It's being dragged by the momentum and the speed of the inside wheel. So what a differential gear does, it allows both tires to make the same turn at their own speed. And so it compensates for the difference. The word differential or differentiation just means a difference. And so it allows for that difference to happen when it's going around a turn. Mature people have a healthy emotional differential. Emotionally healthy people have the ability to maneuver through life in such a way that they're not forcing or dragging other people to come along with them, nor are they being forced or dragged along in the process of maneuvering through life. They have a healthy emotional differential. Emotionally healthy people know who they are. They have found their true identity, and they're living out of that identity. They know where they start and where they end, where another person picks up, and there's a separation between who I am and who you are. They're not living their lives out of kind of this sense of what other people expect of them. They're not living out of being manipulated or forced to think and believe and act based on what other people think and feel of them. They are mature and have a healthy differential. So here's a fun little activity for us to do here. Let's look at the characteristics or qualities of a healthy differential and an unhealthy differential. And just for yourself, see which one kind of resonates with you, kind of where you land in the process here. So first of all, some of the characteristics of a healthy differential, and I think you have this on your handout as well, so check that before you begin to write out all this. Make sure that you're not writing something that's already handed out to you there. So here's the characteristics of a healthy differential. Does this apply to you? Your purpose and identity come from within. So if you're a follower of Jesus, it ultimately comes from Christ, but it comes from within, not externally. You can state personal beliefs and values, and this is the key, in a non-condescending, non-dogmatic way. If you have a healthy differential, you can think and act well independently or with a team. You can take that turn the same turn independently or as a team. You are mostly unaffected by criticism or praise. You can listen well without reacting, and you can communicate well without antagonizing. You are free to enjoy life and play, and you handle stress in a non-anxious manner. So is that a description of you? I mean, none of us get 100% on this. None of us are perfect and have reached that perfection. But does that kind of match who you are? Your way of handling and maneuvering through life? That type of person is able to live and relate from their true self. So they live and relate out of their true identity. Now here are the qualities or the characteristics of an unhealthy differential. And ask yourself, is this me? Do any of these apply to me? You are unable to see where you end and others begin. There's kind of like a meshing of who you are. Sometimes we talk about codependency type situations. You have an inconsistent stand on beliefs and values. Often you impose yours on others, or you easily assume the beliefs and values of others. Sometimes this is a natural part of a new Christian, someone that's just starting to walk with Jesus because they're learning and growing. But if you've been on the road a while and you're still kind of very much swayed by what other people think and believe, and you're kind of in one situation you think this and believe that, but you talk to another person and suddenly you think, no, okay, I agree with you over here. There's kind of that inconsistency. You need constant affirmation and validation from others, kind of need the spotlight on you. Your esteem and identity are influenced by criticism and praise. So if you're being criticized, your self-esteem can go way down really fast. If you're being praised, your self-esteem can kind of come way up again. But again, it fluctuates so easily. You avoid others for fear of being overwhelmed or swallowed up. You seek or avoid power, control, knowledge, or praise to hide your insecurities. And this last one is interesting. This is a symptom of having an unhealthy differential. You didn't recognize the presence of any of those characteristics or hang-ups in your life. And so if you go, nope, none of those apply to me, chances are they do. Because if you think none of those apply, there's some of those that apply to all of us. And so these are the characteristics of either a healthy differential or an unhealthy differential. So the second one, you live and relate from a false sense of who you are. None of us are perfect. None of us have it all together. None of us have got this fully figured out. I certainly don't. But sometimes we get it right. And sometimes we miss the mark. We get it wrong. Some people, depending on which extreme you kind of lean towards, some people, and again, you can ask yourself if you're that type of person, some people take life's corners really sharp and fast. I mean, if you use the analogy of a car, they maneuver through life, whether it's their decisions, their relationships, their emotions, just everything they do is quick and fast, quick and fast. They just move through life gung-ho and just go kind of thing. And other people that are driving with them in the car are like white-knuckled on the dash, or their face is pressed against the side window because they're moving so fast that the other person can't keep up and can't keep pace with it. So some people are that way. Other people move through life so slow. They're overly cautious. Everything is a potential hazard, and so they just take their time so very slowly and cautiously, just in case. And if you're driving with that type of person, you are ready to get out and walk. Like, just get going. Like, come on, we've got life to live. Let's just move it along, please. And so that type of person maneuvers through relationships or decisions or their emotional stuff in such a slow, overly cautious sort of way. Which one are you? Which kind of life driver are you? Taking corners really, really fast and crazy, or way too slow and overly cautious? With a healthy emotional differential, we have the ability to live out of our true self with confidence and humility, so that when we're maneuvering through life and we're taking some of those sharp turns, we're not dragging other people along, nor are we being dragged along, because we know who we are. We're confident in ourselves. We're not perfect. We haven't yet arrived, but we feel like we're confident and we kind of have a handle on things. And I'm not going to be forced or manipulated to go at life's speed that you're driving, and I'm not going to force you to go at my speed. We have that differential where we're taking the same turn, but at a slightly different speed and distance. You ever been driving behind someone, this just came to mind, where they're turning left, but in order to turn left, they swerve out into the right-hand lane to turn left? I don't know if that's a prairie thing. I've seen a few people do it here, right? To take a left-hand turn, they swerve way out, overly cautious, right? And then there's others that cut the corner, kind of just take it. Kind of two ways of looking at how people do life. My boys are always telling me as I drive on the 401 that there's two dangerous ways to drive on the 401. One is to go faster than the flow of traffic, right? The other one is to go slower than the flow of traffic, right? Those are the two extremes. And so the safest, apparently, I have to look into this yet, is to go is to go at the actual speed or the flow of traffic. Apparently, that's the safest way. Makes sense to what we're talking about here, for sure. So, begin to wrap this up a little bit here. If you have ever felt like you've lost your sense of self, you've lost your true identity, somewhere along the way you start living out of a false sense of who you are, I want to give you 4 steps to be able to reestablish your emotional differential. Your emotional and spiritual differential, okay? So these are 4 very practical things that you need to do and begin to incorporate into your life. And if you're already doing them, kind of amp it up a little bit more in order to develop an emotional, healthy differential. The first one is you need to listen in silence and solitude. Listen in silence and solitude. This is so difficult and challenging in today's culture. Because even when we think we're being alone and quiet, we're not. Because generally speaking, even when I'm just going to hang out at home alone tonight, we have the TV on or the YouTube on or the music's on or we're texting or whatever. We're never fully alone and in quiet. There's always noise, even if it's peripheral noise. So we find this very, very challenging in our culture today. You ever use those noise-canceling headphones? You ever have any of those where they kind of block out all sound? If you put those on but don't actually plug them into anything and use those as a way to kind of get to a point of silence and solitude and just kind of completely dampen out, turn off all the external noise, and what do you do then? You listen. In the silence and the solitude, you listen to your own emotions, your own thoughts. And, more importantly, you listen to what God is saying in that silence and solitude. It's challenging, it's difficult, it's hard to do. If you don't have that as a habit already, I encourage it, but it's difficult to start. You know, we often think that God has to speak to us in what we call spiritual ways. It has to be like a burning bush experience or kind of a voice from heaven or a prophet's got to come and say, "Thus saith the Lord," kind of a thing. But what if God is trying to speak to us through our emotions? Through what we're thinking and feeling about something? What if that knot in your stomach that you get sometimes is God trying to tell you something? Or simply speaking through that knot in your stomach? Or that burst of adrenaline? Or that headache? Or that sleepless night? What if God is trying to communicate to us through our joys, our passions, our ups, our downs, our good and our bad experiences? What if it's not always some kind of a burning bush experience, but simply God speaking to the core of who we are? And so being in silence and solitude gives God an opportunity to speak to us in ways that are more natural than supernatural sometimes. And it's amazing what we can hear from God. A little nudge, a little reminder, a little encouragement. When we hear this little voice speaking to us through something that we're experiencing or feeling in the moment. Now, I'm not suggesting that all of our feelings, that God is speaking to every single thing that we feel and experience, right? We've got to use some wisdom and caution and all those things. But be more open to what God is saying. Why am I feeling this? Why am I thinking this? What might God be saying to me in this circumstance? Give yourself permission to feel in a contemplative sort of way. Number 2 is listen to trusted friends. Dietrich Bonhoeffer, which is also difficult for a newfie to say, Dietrich Bonhoeffer is a German pastor and theologian during Nazi Germany. And maybe you've heard of him. And he has some really great writing. Here's what he says about either being alone or being with other people. So important. He says, "Let the person who cannot be alone beware of community. And let the person who is not in community beware of being alone." Now think about that for a minute. And again, which one are you? Which one do you kind of lean towards? Let the person who cannot be alone beware of community. And let the person who is not in community beware of being alone. You see, we like being in an environment where we feel good. We feel that this is our zone kind of a thing. But sometimes in order to grow and mature in the ways that we need to allow for the opposite of that to be happening in our lives. Having trusted friends, someone in your life, not just this large group of people around you, like sometimes a church can be just a large group of people. Yeah, I have a lot of friends. If you look at my Facebook, I've got a lot of friends. And they like me. But actually having trusted friends, people that you can actually go and unload on and dump on, and you know they're going to love you and accept you no matter what you had to say. A trusted friend who will actually hold up a mirror to you and say, you know what? You need to see this. You need to look at this. And they can do that in such a loving and gracious way, but in a way that actually helps you to take that look beneath the surface of the iceberg. We need those trusted friends. And if you don't have those, I encourage it. 1 or 2 or 3 people that you can trust and confide in. It may be a family member, it may not be, but someone that will help hold up a mirror and say, you know what? I see you living out of a false self, and I call out the true self that I see in you. I call out what I see God has put in you. And so you need that kind of a friend. Number 3 is to break free of our comfort zones. Comfort zones. What is your emotional comfort zone? Because we all have them. We all have an emotional comfort zone. The funniest thing is to see a situation where 2 people of extreme comfort zones have to come together and do something together because they're polar opposites in what they consider a good time. And so what is your emotional comfort zone? Here are some examples. Perhaps giving or receiving a compliment feels awkward or even wrong to you. How do you respond when someone gives you a compliment? Are you good at giving compliments? Maybe for you, even a hint of conflict feels like death. Some people just don't do conflict. That's like, no, that's not for me. Maybe for you, asking for help or not knowing something, not knowing what to do, feels like a failure. For some people, if they don't have the answer, they just feel like they've failed you and they've let you down so bad. Being misunderstood for some people is a crisis. They hate being misunderstood. That's outside of their comfort zone. Perhaps you avoid being around difficult people at all costs. This whole differential thing is just like, no, I won't drive with that person. I can't do it. That's your comfort zone. So what's your emotional comfort zone? Do you know what psychiatrists do to help people break free of their phobias? If you have a fear of spiders or a fear of heights, do you know what it is that psychiatrists do to help you overcome your fear? They put you in the very place with a spider, or they take you up to a high place. They actually make you confront the fear. Now, they do it in a controlled environment. They do it in a safe and helpful kind of a way. But if you have a fear of spiders, they make you deal with spiders. And so whatever your comfort zones are, the way to break free of your comfort zone is actually to step outside of it. Now you can do that in a very cautious and very kind of careful and wise sort of a way, and maybe someone can help you do that. But to break free of your comfort zone and to develop your own emotional differential, you need to step outside of what's natural or what's normal for you. Number four is to pray for the courage to change. Pray for the courage to change. It's said that most people won't make change until the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of changing. Ever heard that? Most people don't want to make change unless the pain of staying the same becomes greater, and then they'll make the change necessary. But change is necessary for growing and maturing. And again, whether you're a follower of Jesus or not, we all want to grow and mature, and it's going to require some change from us. And that change takes courage. Any big change requires us to have a lot of courage to do so. Let me illustrate it with this example here. Imagine a person who is a chronic doer. So their identity is wrapped up in their doing. Okay, so whether you're a denier, a divider, a doer, your identity gets wrapped up in that. You start living out of that identity. And so you become a person that does a lot for a lot of people. If you decide, okay, no, that's not my true identity, although it's good to be a doer, I don't want that to be my identity. I want my identity to be something more than that. I want my identity to be in Christ. And you start to make changes, it's going to require you to have a lot of courage. You need to pray for courage for a couple of reasons. One, because it's going to require you to step outside of your comfort zones. But one of the big reasons why it's going to require you to have courage, and you need to pray for courage, is because if you are a doer and a lot of people are depending on all that you do, and you're a chronic doer in an unhealthy sort of way, those people are depending on your unhealthy way of doing things. And it's going to take courage. If you decide, I'm going to make some changes, you're going to get some kickback from a lot of people, because there's a whole lot of people depending on the unhealthy version of who you are. And that applies to whatever the symptom might be that hits home with you. Whatever those symptoms are, whatever the unhealthy part of you is, other people get used to that. And they begin to live their lives based on the unhealthy version of who you are. And so you need to pray for courage, because when you make change, some people are not going to like that. Now, they may not actually say it to your face, but they're not going to like the changes that you're making, because they depend on the unhealthy you. So change requires courage, and so you need to pray and ask God to give you the courage that you need for change. Let's wrap this up. If you are a follower of Jesus, your true identity is found in Christ and who He is. And so you're being reshaped. Your soul is being reshaped into the image of Christ. So for followers of Jesus, the Apostle Paul said this. He said, I am crucified with Christ, and I no longer live, but Christ lives in me. The life I now live, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave Himself for me. There's this beautiful thing happens when we are crucified with Christ, and we die to the things that prevent or hinder us from being in His image. We start living out of Christ in us. We start talking like Jesus talked. We start loving like Jesus loved. And we start doing it out of a healthy place, out of our true identity. And that's the journey of discipleship. That's the journey of growing and maturing as a Christian, is to begin to live out of who Christ is and model your life after Him. Let me finish with this little throwback to our differential gear. When we are moving through life, especially if you're a follower of Jesus, Jesus has a differential gear with you. He's perfect in all His ways, and He's moving through life in all His perfection. But in His grace and His mercy, He is allowing us to move at a different speed and a slightly different distance than what He is, because He has an emotional differential with us, and He's allowing us that freedom. And we need to recognize that and live accordingly. because it becomes legalistic to try to, force something to happen that's not really being the way that God intended. Or we just give up altogether and say, no, I can never do that. That's way too hard. But Jesus comes alongside, and he has that differential with us and allows us to move at our speed, kind of going the same direction as he is, but allowing us to have some of that different distance and speed at work. And so we give ourselves over and trust him to lead us to the better place and the place of maturity as we grow in Christ. So, hopefully you're able to identify some of the areas of your life, both the positive and the negative, and not in a condemning sort of way, but in a way that allows you, allows others, and most of all allows God to walk with you and maneuver with you through life and through what he has in store for you. So let me pray. God, I thank you so much that your grace is sufficient for us. I thank you that you have a plan and a purpose for our lives. And even for anyone today who does not know you and has not committed their lives to you, you have a plan and a purpose for them. You have a beautiful picture of what their life should look like. And I pray, Lord, that each one of us would acknowledge that and see that and want to embrace that. And your love and mercy and patience allows us to travel at a certain speed where we're not being dragged or forced into anything. And Lord, help us to have that kind of emotional health ourselves, where we can walk with others in a sense of security in who we are and allow them to be who they are, but challenge and encourage each other to grow in the best way possible. So we thank you for your goodness, your faithfulness, your love in all these things. Amen.